The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 21. Today, I invite you to journey with me through one of the most profound and eventful chapters in the New Testament, the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 21. This chapter captures moments of Jesus' ministry where he powerfully communicates truths about faith, humility, and obedience. The stories and parables Jesus shares in this chapter are not just historical events, but divine lessons meant to inspire us in our walk with God today. As we explore this chapter, my hope is that you will see yourself within these stories and be stirred to reflect on your own life. Let's allow these ancient truths to speak to our present circumstances, encouraging us to grow in faith, to challenge us in areas where we have become complacent, and to remind us of the incredible power and love of God. The Triumphal Entry, a lesson on humility and fulfillment of prophecy. Now, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 21, begins with what is known as the Triumphal Entry, Jesus' celebrated arrival into Jerusalem. The crowd is ecstatic, waving palm branches and shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David." It's a moment of joy and expectation as the people recognize Jesus as the promised Messiah. However, what's striking is the manner of Jesus' arrival. Instead of coming as a warrior king riding a mighty horse, he enters on a humble donkey, fulfilling the prophecy of Zechariah 9:9. "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey." This is a moment of rich symbolism. Jesus is showing that his kingdom is unlike any other. It's not a kingdom built on force, wealth, or military might, but one founded on humility, peace, and service. While the people expected a political ruler who would overthrow their Roman oppressors, Jesus came to overthrow something much deeper: the spiritual oppression of sin and separation from God. Now, in our own lives, we often get caught up in the idea that greatness is about power or status. But Jesus flips this idea upside down. True greatness comes from humility and service. We are called to follow his example by leading with love, not pride. Now ask yourself, where in your life can you practice more humility? How can you, like Jesus, choose the path of servanthood, even when it's not the popular or easy choice? The cleansing of the temple, a call to righteousness and purity. Immediately after his triumphal entry, Jesus enters the temple, the very heart of Jewish worship. But instead of finding a place of prayer and worship, he finds people buying, selling, and exploiting others for profit. And filled with righteous anger, Jesus overturns the tables of the money changers and those selling doves. He declares, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers." This moment is not just about cleaning up the physical space of the temple. It's about cleansing the hearts of the people. The temple, which was meant to be a sacred place where people connected with God, had become a place of corruption. Jesus' actions remind us that God desires purity in our hearts and worship. He wants us to remove anything that distracts us from him, anything that corrupts our relationship with him and with others. Think, what tables in your life need to be overturned? Perhaps there are distractions, habits, or even attitudes that are hindering your relationship with God. Maybe it's time to cleanse your heart, making space for God's presence and purpose. When we allow the clutter of life, whether it's materialism, bitterness, or pride, to take up space in our hearts, we can immediately lose sight of what truly matters. Now think about that. How can you make your life a house of prayer rather than a den of distractions? The withering of the fig tree, the power of faith. In one of the most visually striking moments of Matthew 21, Jesus encounters a fig tree with leaves but no fruit. When he finds it barren, he curses the tree, and it withers immediately. His disciples are astonished, but Jesus uses the moment to teach them about the incredible power of faith. He says to them, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you can say to this mountain, 'Go throw yourself into the sea,' and it will be done." The fig tree here represents more than just a tree. It symbolizes those who appear outwardly religious but lack the fruits of faith, like love, kindness, and obedience. You see, Jesus' lesson is not just about withering trees, it's about the power that comes from having genuine, active faith. And with true faith, even the mountains in our lives, those seemingly insurmountable obstacles, can be moved. Think to yourself, what mountains are standing in your way today? It could be a personal challenge, a relationship issue, or a dream that seems too far out of reach. Jesus reminds us that with faith, we can overcome what seems impossible. The key is to have faith without doubt, trusting fully in God's power to act. Ask yourself, is your faith producing fruit, or is it just leaves? And we need to cultivate a faith that moves mountains, not just in words, but in action and belief. The parable of the two sons, a lesson in obedience and action. Later in the chapter, Jesus tells a powerful parable about two sons. A father asks each son to go work in his vineyard. The first son says, "I will not," but later changes his mind and goes. The second son says, "I will, sir," but never goes. Jesus asks, which of the two did the will of his father? The answer, of course, is the first son. And the lesson here is simple but profound. What we do matters more than what we say. It's easy to make promises, to say we will follow God or declare our intentions, but God values action over empty words. True obedience is demonstrated by what we do, not just by what we say. So ask yourself, how often do we, like the second son, say all the right things but fail to follow through? Jesus challenges us to examine our own lives. Are we living out our faith in action? It's not enough to say we believe or that we will do something for God. He calls us to put our words into action. Where in your life can you start saying yes to God, not just with your words, but with your deeds? The parable of the tenants, the consequences of rejecting God's call. So this chapter ends with a sobering parable, the parable of the tenants. A landlord rents out his vineyard to tenants, but when they send his servant to collect the fruit, the tenants beat and kill him. Finally, the landowner sends his own son, believing they will respect him, but the tenants kill the son, hoping to take the vineyard for themselves. Now Jesus is foreshadowing his own death at the hands of the religious leaders who would reject him, the Son of God. The parable teaches us about the consequences of rejecting God's call and his messengers. Just like the tenants rejected the landowner's servants and son, many people reject God's call today. Jesus is just warning us that there are consequences when we refuse to listen to God's voice and harden our hearts to his grace. Are there areas of your life where you've been resisting God's call? Ask yourself, are you rejecting his messengers, the people whose circumstances he placed in your life to bring you closer to him? Don't ignore the voice of God when he calls. There is always grace and mercy available, but we must choose to respond. The vineyard of life is entrusted to us, and we are responsible for what we do with it. So, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 21, presents a tapestry of lessons, and each is woven with threads of faith, humility, obedience, and grace. And as we conclude today, I want to ask you a few questions that I believe you should allow to linger in your heart. Ask, how can I live with more humility, following the example of Jesus' triumphant yet humble entry into Jerusalem? What tables in my life need to be overturned, clearing out the distractions that keep me from God? And ask, where do I need to exercise greater faith, trusting that God can move the mountains in my life? Am I a person of action like the first son, or am I merely saying the right things without following through? And finally, am I accepting or rejecting God's call in my life? You see, these are not just questions for reflection, but invitations for transformation. And as you go about this week, I ask you to carry these lessons with you. Let them shape your actions, strengthen your faith, and lead you to a deeper relationship with God. So, may you leave here today with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to step into the fullness of the life God has called you to live. And remember, even the smallest seed of faith can move the greatest mountain when placed in the hands of God. Thank you. Tomorrow we'll discuss chapter 22.